Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey, Aaron, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Did you bring the coffee?
I did not. We're on the other. You're on the other side of the pond, so and it's actually your evening, and I appreciate you sparing your evening as well. Certainly,
it's never too late for coffee, though.
That is true. Yeah. Aaron, you're a super accomplished guy. You've written 3 books. You took Salesforce from 0 to $100 million. You kind of pioneered this whole methodology that we all talk about, the Sales 2.0. Now you are an entrepreneur, you are a sales guru, investor, you name it, you are. Of all the things you've accomplished in your career, what is one thing that you're most proud of?
Well, so family actually is what I'm actually most proud of. And we have a lot of kids. So I know it's probably not what you meant, but that actually is also what I'm most proud of and the thing that is most important to me, because really that's irreplaceable. I like to say that starting a business is one of the best ways to make money, like financial wealth. Not the only way, but one of the best ways to create financial wealth. Starting a family is, at least for me, a way to create emotional wealth. So on the professional side, most proud of, it's really hard to say. I think at heart, I've always been a book person, reading them. I didn't write a book until later, till I was, I don't know, 40, is that right? 35, late 30s, my first. So I think even just publishing my first book was something I was very proud of. One you probably have not heard of, called CEO Flow, Turn Your Employees into Mini CEOs. Never really told that many people about it, but
I did see it on Amazon. It's still there.
Oh yeah, it's there. There's a few people who bought it, maybe 4 or 5. But that's something that, I don't know, some people maybe writing comes easy, for most people don't. For me, sometimes it does, but it's still this love-hate relationship of creating content and kind of like being excited about the idea of content sometime, or the book idea, but then getting into the weeds of like producing it and writing and editing, and just like that sometimes it's a trudge, and sometimes it's fun, like the whole rainbow of emotions around creating content or creating signature pieces of content.
So obviously you've kind of touched on this. So what is the big why that keeps you motivated and keeps you going? And I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear from you firsthand.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is I've thought a lot about life purpose for a long time, for 15 years. The main thing that really motivates me and keeps me going is my family. That's one. It's like the main, I don't even know if you call it external motivation. It's external and internal. It's like everything. Like external is a big family of 9 kids. I still have to make money to support the family. I mean, I started early at Salesforce, but not early enough. But internal, like I love my family, be able to provide for them, and it just provides a lot of meaning. So, but the other things that keep me going is, I have a business and a team. So I know for me, showing up for other people is very motivating. Like, in other words, for me, the best way for me to exercise is, I mean, I can go to the gym on my own and, do that. I mean, I run now. For years, I wasn't really consistent with exercise because we had so baby after baby after baby. But what helps me be consistent is when there's someone else to show up for, like a personal trainer or a class. So I know that that's something that helps I know to motivate myself, even when I don't want to, is to kind of show up for other people. And that really works for me. So that's a lot of times my why. I motivate I want to make myself better, but to do that, I show up for other people. So it's a kind of a paradox, I guess. To show up for myself, I show up to other people so I can show up for myself too.
Yeah, and there's that accountability aspect of it too that comes from
it.
Yep. So how did that transition happen for you, where you were a sales leader at Salesforce and then went on to become an entrepreneur? How did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, it actually started before I started at Salesforce. And anyone who's read the Predictable Revenue book might remember this, where I had started an internet company and it failed. and we raised a few $1 million back in like 99, 2000. Company went out of business. That was incredibly painful. And one of the lessons was, well, if I'm going to start another company, I need to know is, see if I'm going to found one, how do you build a sales team? Right? Because at that company, I'd hired a VP of sales, but I'd abdicated. I hadn't done sales before. I was like 29. I'd sold ads in the Stanford newspaper. I'd had like a painting business. I'd like any entrepreneur, I'd sold, but in starting a company and building a sales team, I didn't know how to build a professional sales team that was organized and predictable. And I'd hired a VP of sales, and I'd say I abdicated my understanding to them. I didn't delegate. What I should have done, what I recommend CEOs do now, is to be involved in the sales process from the beginning, so that you know what works and what doesn't. You may even be selling the first 10 or 20 deals or being a part of it. Have your hands in it so that you know how to hire the right people, or you can better sense if something's working or not working, rather than being kind of lost and confused.
Yeah,
so that's why I went to Salesforce in the first place.
And having
that how to build a sales team.
And having that firsthand experience give you the ability to kind of pinpoint where's the area of opportunity as well, right? Where can you refine it? Where can you improve it?
Yeah, and for sure. And that's something some people, you got to be willing to do the dirty work.
Mm-hmm. And how has the entrepreneurial journey been for you? And I know you, even in your recent book, you touch on a little bit about getting started with the consulting side of the business. So how has it been in terms of becoming an entrepreneur and building a business of your own?
There's a lot of parallels with being an entrepreneur and being a parent, right? It's like the worst job in the world, and it's the best job in the world. It just depends on the day.
It's true.
It's a roller coaster, up and down. And I think, I don't know, for all the entrepreneurs I know, and I don't know all the entrepreneurs out there, but all the ones I know all have the same, like some days it's amazing and great, and other days it's just horrible and stressful. That's what my experience has been like. And yet it's been worth it. And again, that's the parenting. And again, because some days are just horrible and some days are amazing. It's not even the whole day. It's usually more like moment to moment, hour to hour.
You've spent your entire career learning and watching how people buy and sell, right? And you've written books around it. You're training people. What surprises you the most from your finding?
Right. I mean, the thing is, it's this the paradox where some things never change. Like the psychology never changes. It's just the same. It's probably been the same for 1,000 years in terms of buying and selling and marketing. There's some principles that are just timeless, and then a lot of the techniques change. And what's different today is that there's an infinity of options, right? There's more ways than ever to market, and more ways than ever to sell, and more types of customers than ever. So you've got this kind of set of timeless principles, and then you've got kind of the sky's the limit on anything you want to do, anything you want to learn in sales. There's just an unending amount of stuff. You can never learn it all.
This whole concept of learning, do you feel like the salespeople that you've trained and that have worked under you have that desire to always be learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best ones do, right? And so I think another surprising thing is that how little sometimes people know about, I don't know, what I would think is, it's for me, having looked at this and understanding the basics of things like messaging and how people, like react, and it's like how little people know about selling in some ways. But the thing is, you can't be great at everything. Right? You can't be great at like the prospecting and the selling and selling to current customers, and kind of and you got to pick your specialties and focus on things so you can do really well. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of salespeople, a thing they're not very good at would be, for example, like writing emails or writing LinkedIn notes or even writing. It's not often the strength. We tend to put too much information in. So one of the surprises, it's still like how often people just like dump way too much information into a proposal or an email or whatever it is, and expect people to read it all or grasp it. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and I think you touched on an important point, because I think the biggest weakness I've seen in salespeople, they kind of feel like they arrived and then they don't need any more knowledge about, how to be better at selling, right? Like, for example, like it's, practice makes you perfect, right? And then you get mastery by doing role plays and things like that. But I've seen, the coachable reps are much more willing to do those kind of exercises, whereas the other one, they feel like, no, I'm too busy for doing that. I know what I'm doing, and move on to that sort of a mentality.
Yep.
So that's why I was curious.
I mean, yeah, if you can always get better, and even if you can't get better, the world moves on. So you gotta find ways to stay fresh and keep up. Not necessarily every day, every week, but even with like predictable revenue, the book, there's a lot of the book which is still totally applicable today, almost 10 years later. Some isn't, some isn't. And with the impossible to inevitable book, and we wrote it as something that would be, relevant for 10 years, 20 years. And a lot of it will be, and there'll be parts that won't.
Most certainly. And I think, in the predictable revenue, which is one of the first books that I read, learning how to go and do prospecting and things like that. And I think this whole concept of sending mass emails, that's gone away. Right now, you're all about personalization, doing extremely narrow focused email that are extremely, specific to that person, right? So the techniques hasn't changed, but the volume and how you go about executing it.
Yeah, to some extent. It's a little bit different now because a lot of people use sequencers or sales engagement tools that send templates, maybe one by one to a lot of people. So it's not mass email as much, but they still use the same email to lots of people. So I do think that's decreasing. The thing is, or I don't know, so that's probably everything's increasing still. So I think faster, like you said, I think it's better to think of, there's still probably lots of mass email.
Mm-hmm.
What's growing even faster is people sending ideally more thoughtful, personalized emails that are more targeted and trying to do fewer, better emails to the right people. Like that's something that in Europe has been happening because of GDPR. Still lots of cold email, all the outbound, but less mass, more thoughtfulness.
Most certainly. And I think because of the volume has gone up, the recipient isn't as much receptive, right? So they're less likely to even open some of these emails. So you have to become extremely more personalized and use multiple touches, which I think you talk about in your new book as well, right? So not just relying heavily on one channel, but kind of having multiple channels. So obviously you've heard a lot of advices people give about sales and marketing. What's one bad advice you've heard people give about sales?
There was some advice that your salespeople should all be full spectrum, like 360. Salespeople they should do the prospecting and the closing, at least prospecting and closing, and they should maintain customers. That way they kind of know the whole deal. And, it's so by the way, that's horrible advice, except if it's only in a very limited circumstance where you're kind of building a team or you're onboarding someone, and it's a transitional time before you get to that person is specialized in their role or the team is specialized. By specialized, I mean you have a sales team in B2B, prospectors who prospect, closers who close, inbound lead responders or LDRs, lead development reps, basically that junior sales role who responds to marketing leads, if you have them, and customer success for customers. The sports team analogy. If you were a coach, there's no team where you would tell all your players for everyone to attack and everyone to defend at the same time. Like you would never win. You have your attackers, your midfield, your defender, and your goalie. So I understand to tell salespeople they should do all the functions so they are well rounded is just not going to work. It's like saying, all right, everyone, I want all my team to attack and defend, so you all know how to attack and defend. Mm-hmm. They're great. They know how to do both, but you're going to lose all your games.
Makes sense. Which brings me to the question actually that I was going to ask you a little bit later. But this really works well in the SaaS space where you're doing prospecting, you're getting in the door, you find out what do they have in terms of technology, what you're trying to sell, whether they have the problem, are they solving that problem with some alternative options, get them to open up the door to have an AE go there and do the demo. But not all these sales are like that, right? Some of these, let's just say if it's a manufacturing sector or if you're in a heavy service industry where the average ticket sale is much bigger and the long sales cycles are even a lot longer than that, and having that relationship built very early on by the AE is going to go a long way. So what would you do in those scenarios where you can't really have these specialists be the one that doing prospecting and also doing the demo and selling and things of that nature?
Not sure. Like why? I guess if you're selling manufacturing, why can't you have a prospector? Basically meet people there, set up appointments, and bring in a salesperson.
Sometimes the volume isn't there, right? Whereas when you're trying to sell a software, yeah, you're trying to get to the thousands of customers, whereas these guys are probably selling 2 deals a year, right? And you have fairly large of those, large deal sizes.
No, still the same. The place where it doesn't work is when the deal sizes are actually go the other way. When you've got like customers who are a few $100s a year, or $1,000 a year, or $10 a month. So the problem is more on like the really small side when you're getting, if I'm a prospector, when the math works out, if I'm a prospector and if I can get X appointments a month, and then let's say I bring in 1 customer, 2 customers, or 3 customers a month, then each one's worth $300, right? There's just no money there. But as you go up market, and whether you're SaaS, whether you're selling to software companies or manufacturing companies or utilities or government or the specialization with prospectors and salespeople works just as well. As you go up market, even to super enterprise, where it doesn't necessarily work as well as when you're starting to get into places where it really is pure relationships, like government lobbying, or and sometimes like a lot of defense contractors or some agencies. Like there's definitely pockets where you have to have relationships. Like if you're gonna break into Hollywood, if you're an actor, you can't just go prospect. You have to like know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and there are situations like that. But otherwise, the prospector to salesperson model works. Whether you're selling to SaaS companies or anyone else, or whether you are a manufacturing company, as long as you have salespeople selling, it can work. It gets more challenging there are definitely companies where it's more challenging, where it's like if you're a services company, if you're not differentiated, if you're in a commoditized market. But that's really more of a question around, is outbound prospecting going to make sense? So a lot of times if it's no, again, if you're like a lot of outsourced software development shops, agencies, it's just not feasible for them to prospect because it's too hard. They can't identify their customer. They can't really explain their repeatable problem. So prospecting may not make sense for them at all.
So is that where you would advocate more for an inbound strategy, though, who are the prospect who are actively looking for you, make sure that they're finding you, as opposed to having a pretty large SDR team?
There's 2 ways. If you have a product, it's easier for it to make outbound work because a product is more of like a concrete thing. It's easier to explain. The harder it is for you to explain what you do and to kind of get things to click for someone, the more likely you should focus on content marketing or inbound marketing. Like if it's a real challenge to get people to say, oh, okay, I get what you do. It takes more than, maybe 10 or 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Content marketing is a better way to explain it. So that might be, or if you're in a very commoditized competitive market, if you are if you're like a VAR or some types of VAR. So if you're a website hosting company, if you are a website agency, a lot of services companies, again, there's thousands of agencies. So there, rather than outbound, I focus typically on like content marketing or personality marketing, where you're really like bringing forth your people and showing off your people's expertise as a way to connect with people, so they believe in you and they get interested in how you can help them.
So basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, you kind of have to look at your business and figure out, is this something that is where there's thousands of customers that can use your product? Volume is not going to be a problem in terms of fulfillment. You are super hyper focused in terms of what the product is. Then an SDR plus an AE model really becomes more useful. Whereas if it's more of a service and it's commoditized, you probably want to have your focus mostly on demand gen through an inbound methodology, and then maybe having the AE kind of lead all the way from the initial conversation until close.
Yeah, basically. And I would say that, so one other change is you don't need to have thousands of targets to do outbound, because you might have 100 really big companies who might have, hundreds of divisions, and the deal sizes are that big. Again, so there's kind of this case by case where, for salespeople, they should do some prospecting, but maybe only to 5, 10, or maybe 30 kind of accounts or key partners for them to effectively like develop them. Beyond that, you kind of have to assume if there's many more divisions or companies beyond that, they're going to need some help. That's another rule of thumb you can use to kind of gauge what point you need to, can salespeople do it everything themselves versus get a prospector.
So here's another question then. Obviously, you hear this school, hey, you need a salespeople need to be a subject matter expert. They need to be creating content, sharing content, being active on places like LinkedIn, right? Being a go-to, a trustworthy resource for some of the stuff that you're talking about or selling. You can't really do that well if, especially in places where you probably are, I don't know, that some people may not even stay in the company that long enough. So what's your take on, people that says, social selling sucks, it doesn't work, whereas the other guys are saying you got to become a subject matter expert, ton of content get created and shared so you can drive and attract prospects to you.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is one of these weird things where so if you take a team of 10 salespeople, I'm going to make up a rough number, so don't take this as gospel, but let's say that 2 or 3 of them could be really good at social selling. They just have a knack for it. And the rest, 2 or 3 or 4 might be okay at it, and a couple, it's just a waste of time. Like, social selling is valuable. It can be valuable, but it's not as scalable across a team. So I think you have to treat it as something where, equip your team, find out the people who really have a knack for it, like, encourage them to really get great at it and see if they can help the rest of the team. But it's just not fair to most salespeople to expect them to be able to be subject matter experts and really to get a lot of traction on social selling. I will say that the idea there is, are there simple techniques that you can give your team to get, like, fewer is better, like some simple techniques so they can use social selling, because there's so many ways, it can be so complicated, right? Even LinkedIn alone, you do direct messages, comment on people's posts, you post your own content, there's groups, there's all this stuff. So the company's job is to kind of find a few key techniques that the team can use to get some traction there, rather than expect them to all figure it out themselves, which they won't.
So from you obviously being around salespeople, trained and coached a lot of those guys, what have you seen kind of the biggest obstacle standing in the way of them succeeding in their role as a salesperson?
I really believe just the world of just growing complexity is one of the biggest in noise. Is really, I think the biggest or Uber challenge, right? There's too many sales apps. There's too many things to do. There's too many types of prospects now. There's too many responsibilities. So that's one reason why specialization helps, because if I take this overwhelm, if I'm a salesperson doing everything, I'm like already underwater, doing lots of things poorly. At least if someone else is doing the bulk of the prospecting, I can focus. If someone else is managing customers, I can focus, because the noise, the confusion, the world is getting noisier. Like, everyone's customers are dealing with this. There's more education than ever, but there's more confusion than ever. So I think that the main antidote is focus. Really, predictable revenue in the book is all about focus. A lot of the inevitable book is about focus. But that is the number one challenge for salespeople, and for I think everybody.
So obviously, most of your experience has been building big sales team at companies like Salesforce, and obviously you also offer predictable revenue as a service to so many companies, especially as smaller organizations that are trying to build a sales team internally. And you don't have this progression path. You start as an SDR, you become an AE, now you become VP of sales, and then CRO, whatever those job functions, right? If you don't have that kind of a progression path, how do you still build a really effective A-player sales team in a smaller organization without really showing them a very big progression path?
Yeah, well, having your specialized sales roles really makes it easy to have that career path, and it's for the younger people, it's more important than ever for them to believe in and want to invest in the job, because they know where they're going to go. So, I think there's always a lot of ways to try to add. Like, people get bored when there's nothing to learn. So yes, side projects. There's other ways to kind of keep them engaged with side projects to help develop them with new skills, whether they could be a team lead or like study a vertical. More common now is adding micro promotions. So even on like the SDR prospector side, you might have SDR1, then SDR2, SDR3, team lead. I think too, there are some companies where you have this gap. You've got like a prospecting role, and then just prospectors for then enterprise salespeople, and there's not an interim kind of small business, inside sales. Well, everything's inside, but inside step. And so there's some companies will have they'll create like a special program to help bridge the gap between someone who does well at prospecting, but then to go from there to enterprise sales is a really big jump. And so they'll spend time developing things like boot camps and coaching and other ways to kind of bridge the gap so that people can make a career path out of it. Anytime you can create that career path, hiring salespeople from the outside is important, but it's also risky. Mm-hmm. So when you can develop people from inside the company, and you kind of already know before they're hired and promoted, their strengths and weaknesses. They're already ramped up. They're basically preloaded. Like there's so many advantages to that when you can do that, that's their first choice. And you hire externally when you don't have enough people internally, or sometimes to get some fresh ideas and kind of fresh thinking.
Makes sense. I know we touched on the Predictable Revenue book, and you've mentioned the Impossible to Inevitable book as well. In that book, you spent a lot of energy talking about the importance of specialization and having vertical focus, and why you need to have very, very much a differentiator, right? The importance of those things. And now we've just went through this massive epidemic across the whole globe, and you've seen companies that actually had such focus on certain vertical. Let's say they were selling into hospitality or something like that. What would you need to do differently if you have such a narrow vertical focus and need to prevent such drastic drop in sales happening because of such events like this?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I think especially when you have a pandemic, there's a lot of companies that went out of business or going out of business, right? If you're focused on things like hospitality, travel, and there's really probably not a lot you can do about it, honestly. Mm-hmm. So other than realize that there's a lot of companies, the company may go out of business. It doesn't mean the team has to go out of business, right? There might be other ideas you come up with or new things you start, but not every company is going to made it or will make it. So sometimes the best you can do is realize, and this company's time is at an end, and we just need to either pivot it, or I'm sure there's lots of people who pivoted who tried and just didn't work. Sometimes it does. Kind of knowing when to try to get out of it, do something different, honestly. But this was this was a crazy year in its way. Yeah. And we don't know when hospitality is really going to come back, or if it does. Mm-hmm. For years. No one knows.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think and especially if your product is tailored to that and you don't really have an alternative option, you're pretty much stuck. You just have to wait almost.
Yeah, it's like maybe pick up something new. There's a lot of people who, I know one entrepreneur who shut down one company and he got a job, in marketing for a manufacturing company in Europe because he had to pay the bills, mm-hmm. right? And that's fine. I think we can't let our ego get in the way of doing what needs to be done, which sometimes means I might need to get a job someplace if I'm an entrepreneur. That's right. Or it might be when I worked at Salesforce, I went from being CEO of a company, venture funded company, to the most junior sales job they had, which was answering the 800 line. But I will say, it's like doing that work in the trenches, like the dirty work, that gave me the hands-on experience to then also create that prospecting role and to know exactly what needed, how that had to work and how to grow it. So sometimes when you need to make that change and you don't let your ego get in the way, just focus on what do I need to do to support myself and my family, or what do I need to do to learn what I need, the tools I need in order to be successful. At that point, I needed to learn how sales worked. Mm-hmm. And I got a job when I didn't get paid that much. We got paid to learn how the basically sales worked at a company like Salesforce.com.
Mm-hmm. A couple of rapid fire questions just to get your perspective on certain topics. Obviously, mindset is something we often hear everybody talk about in the sales field. And this is true for entrepreneurs. It's true for sales, especially with a job that you often are faced with rejection. So what's your perspective on mindset for sales and entrepreneurs?
I think one thing that salespeople may not realize is to what extent fear of rejection affects their performance. Fear of rejection of prospects, kind of fear how do I ask, for example, how do I ask about their budget, or how do I ask about decision makers? Well, why wouldn't, what if we just ask it like you're asking about the weather? But that can affect it, the fear of following up too much. So there's a lot of hidden fear of rejection in sales. And when I did a podcast with Dave Curlin, and this is years ago, I think he was the one who talked about this, and I was saying like, yeah, you're right. He wrote at least one sales book. He's a well-known sales professional trainer, author on the East Coast of the States.
Yeah.
But yeah, just how pervasive it is, and we
I
don't
think
even realize it.
I think he was the guy that did train all the HubSpot salespeople. Mark Robertson, I think, refers to that guy as well.
He's in Boston, so it could be.
Yeah. I think I've heard that name for sure. I think he's got the baseball analogy, right? I think
that's Dave. That's
exactly.
Dave, yep.
I certainly remember reading his book or attending a webinar or something. What about personal development? Perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, like personal development, the phrase I think gets a bad rap for a lot of people because smart people think they don't need it. Everyone needs to develop as a person. I think the challenge is how, because we're so caught in our own thinking, it's really hard to get outside the box and to see ourselves from the outside. So sometimes people use a therapist for that, or they go to workshops. Like I did Landmark 15 years ago. That was a great one. Books, right? The Four Agreements was a great book. But I know one thing I found, the accelerated personal development for me was really having a family, because then it's like really kind of what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of father do I want to be? Having a business is about the same. It really kind of forces you, what kind of leader do I want to be? Because it's hard again to kind of like get the feedback and see what am I doing well that aligns with how I want to be versus, everyone's got weaknesses. Everyone's got, like, you never don't have some issue around fear or control, or it's a question, where does it come up? So for me, I think that's the last 10 years, really being a entrepreneur and father has been my own personal development kind of a baking oven. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it gets hot in there, in here.
What about, where do you typically fall into default, leader versus manager?
It's hard to say. It really depends, because a lot of times, for example, my wife is more a lot of the leader in the house around house things and routines there, but sometimes I am with like nannies. So it's very case by case. In the business, some places I tend to be more of an enabler of leaders at the company, or try to be. Like a lead. So kind of the idea of the first book, the CEO Flow book, how to turn your employees into mini CEOs. Like, how can I help develop leaders? And part of that is by showing leadership. And part of that is by giving them the space to be leaders and make mistakes. So I honestly don't feel like I've got it figured out. I don't know if I've ever get it figured out. Every day, I don't know how many, I think entrepreneurs and parents, I believe, would feel this way, which is every day is kind of like a new day. Like whatever worked last week may not, or yesterday may not work tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many people admit that or feel that way. That's what I feel like. It's always like some new thing the next day. But always learning.
It's a journey, and I think you're applying what you learned from last week and trying to improve this week. Oftentimes.
Yep.
Do you have any productivity hack? Obviously, you have a family of almost 12, and you have a business that you're running, and you have so many other things going for you. Is there any productivity hack that keeps you on track?
A lot my calendar, and just it's the thing that helps me like block out doing what when. It's also kind of a curse, because whenever things change, like school starts it's such a source of stress and uncertainty with constant changes with a big family. So I think that's a big one. And the separate one is just being willing to partner with people all over and like kind of trust them. Sometimes people might say over trust them. There's this fine line between delegation and abdication, but I think partnering and just having more. I value partners. That's how I mentioned showing up for other people. So I've always had like a partner on books, like Jason Lemkin with the Impossible book. Business partner. That's how I tend to work. Really works well for me and helps me grow the business. And some people, it's a few dozen. The predictable revenue.com business. So it's really helping companies set appointments, whether we set them for you or whether we show you how to set them and help you build your own team. It's a few $1 million, few dozen people. It's big by some standards, it's tiny by others. Obviously big. Most for the last 10 years, a lot of my energy's gone into family, going from 0 to 9 kids in a short amount of time. So I just feel like I'm just getting started. Like I've done like 1% of, what I'm going to do. Time just flies. Like,
Which brings me to my question about work-life balance. How do you balance your work and your family?
There's no balance. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't. I juggle, I think I'd call it. It's a lot. It's really been for years nonstop for the most part. And that's probably one of my struggles is time for myself and time, like one-on-one time with kids. So like right now, I get up at most days like 6 a.m. for school stuff, 6 days a week. A lot of times I moved to the UK, Edinburgh. I'm up until 11 or 10 or 11, more like 11 or 12 most nights. That's not enough sleep. So I try to take naps, try to do short run. Then I'll get into a rhythm that way for a few weeks, and there's like a school change and I have to start all over from scratch again. So try to take care. It's always like this, how do I take care of myself so I have enough energy and enthusiasm to take care of the business and family? And it's a never ending struggle and opportunity at the same time. So in other words, I kind of figure it out day by day, I think is
most certainly. And I know you got to probably work very closely with Mark Benioff when you were at Salesforce. Any big lessons that you learned from him that you apply in your life?
Honestly, no, he's a brilliant guy. He's different. He is a genius in lots of ways. So, he did an amazing thing with Salesforce. He had the right kind of like vision and marketing and product and sales team. Somehow he's just able to get a lot of great people on the team and a lot of A players. And he made it happen in a great, amazing way. I'm still amazed by it all these years later. They're like 15 or 20 billion and 50,000 people. Like, I don't even know, what do all those people do there? But
I have no idea.
It's amazing what they've done.
He just keep eating all the tech companies that just go to him and say, "Do you want my product?" He'll buy them up.
Yeah.
Just how that happened. I just had a Godard Abel of Steel Bricks was a guest a couple of weeks back, and he obviously sold Steel Bricks to Salesforce, and I think that's probably his second gig sold to Salesforce. So that's what he's known for. So knowing what you know today, what would you do different if you had to do it all over again?
I would have, especially in my 20s, like focused more, like pushed. There's certain years where I would have like, I want to say push harder. I would have been more focused on like, what did I want to accomplish, and to be more proactive in doing it, be more diligent in it. And it's not that I wasted a lot of time. It's just like now I underestimated. I had no idea how, like, the level you need to be at to be successful. I thought I might have been here, but really it's like here. So it's kind of like, if you want to be a concert pianist, whatever a level you think you need to be at, it's probably way harder than you realize. Like, to be a best-selling author, or to have a business, like, I just really underestimated the level of commitment and practice and focus needed to do that. But lesson learned.
Yeah, most certainly, Aaron. I've known you in life because of your books, probably for the last 12 years, and listened to your podcast and read both of those books, Predictable Revenue, and now most recently the Impossible to Inevitable. But I appreciate you sharing this afternoon with me and sharing some of your wisdom. And super admire your commitment to your family and how you've kind of built a big family and how you prioritize the most. Thanks again for your wisdom and sharing this afternoon.
Yeah, Samuel, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.